The ad had promised easy money and adorable kids. But as Mrs. Henderson's luxury SUV purred away down the long tree-lined driveway, leaving me standing on the porch of their sprawling, isolated house, I felt a distinct chill that had nothing to do with the crisp autumn air. The house itself was beautiful, all dark wood and large windows, but something about its silence, even before the kids were asleep, felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. And then there was the doll. It sat on a small, antique chair in the dimly lit hallway, a porcelain figure with wide, unblinking blue eyes that seemed to follow me, even as I pretended not to notice. I swallowed the easy money, suddenly feeling very, very hard-earned. I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling. It was just a doll. A creepy doll, maybe, but harmless. I went into the living room where Leo, 7, and Lily, 5, were engrossed in a cartoon. They were sweet kids, polite and quiet, which was both a blessing and, in this house, a little unnerving. "Okay, guys, almost bedtime," I announced, trying to sound cheerful. Lily, a tiny girl with big brown eyes, looked up. "Can we read a story first?" she asked, clutching a worn teddy bear. "Sure, after you brush your teeth," I said, her innocent request a welcome distraction from the doll's silent vigil. After teeth were brushed and pajamas were on, I settled them into their beds. Lily's room was filled with stuffed animals and bright colors, but even here, a faint sense of unease lingered. Leo's room was next door, equally normal. I read them a chapter from a fairy tale book, their eyelids growing heavy. "Good night, kids," I whispered, pulling their blankets up. "Good night, Sarah," Leo mumbled, already half asleep. Lily, however, was still wide awake, her big eyes fixed on something behind me. "She's watching us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I turned around, but there was nothing there, just a wall. "Who's watching us, sweetie?" I asked, forcing a smile. "The doll," she said, her voice flat. "She always watches." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I remembered the porcelain doll in the hallway. "Oh, the doll downstairs? She's just a toy, Lily." "No," Lily insisted, her voice firm. "The doll in the hall. She moves." I tried to laugh it off, but it came out as a nervous cough. "Dolls don't move, sweetie. Now go to sleep." I kissed her forehead and quickly left the room, pulling the door almost shut. I went downstairs, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The doll was still there, in the hallway, its blue eyes fixed on the front door. Or was it? I felt a prickle of unease. Had it been facing the door before? Couldn't remember. I went into the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and settled onto the couch in the living room, trying to get lost in my phone. The rain outside picked up, drumming against the windows, and the wind began to howl through the tall trees. Then I heard it. A faint, rhythmic click, click, click. It was coming from the hallway. It sounded like tiny, hard footsteps. My heart began to pound. I slowly lowered my phone, straining my ears. The sound stopped. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Just the rain and the wind. I told myself it was the house settling, or maybe the wind rattling something. But the image of Lily's wide, earnest eyes, and her words, "She moves," flashed in my mind. Then the click, click, click started again. This time it was closer. It sounded like it was right outside the living room archway. Slow, deliberate. I froze, my eyes wide, fixed on the archway. The shadows there seemed to deepen, to shift. And then I saw it. A small porcelain foot, peeking out from behind the archway. It was the doll. My breath hitched in my throat. It was standing. It was moving. Slowly, agonizingly. The doll stepped into the living room. It was about 2 feet tall, dressed in an old-fashioned lace dress, its porcelain face unnervingly smooth and blank. Its blue eyes, however, were no longer fixed on a distant point. They were fixed directly on me. It didn't walk so much as glide, its tiny feet making no sound on the carpet, only the faint click, click, click as it shifted its weight. It moved towards me, slowly, steadily. I scrambled backwards on the couch, my hands shaking. I wanted to scream, but my throat was suddenly dry, constricted by terror. The doll stopped a few feet from the couch, its head tilted slightly to the side. Its unblinking blue eyes seemed to bore into my soul, and I felt an icy dread seep into my bones. Then, a faint, high-pitched giggle echoed through the silent room. It wasn't Lily's giggle. It was too cold, too hollow, too ancient. It seemed to come from the doll. The doll raised one of its tiny porcelain hands. Slowly, deliberately, it pointed a slender, unmoving finger at me. And then, a voice, thin and reedy, filled the room. It was the giggle but stretched, distorted, forming words. "You shouldn't be here." The words were drawn out, each syllable a struggle, as if the voice was unused to speaking. It was the voice of a child, but twisted, filled with a profound, chilling malice. I finally found my voice, a raw, primal scream that tore through the silence. I didn't wait. I scrambled off the couch, knocking over the coffee table, and bolted for the front door. My legs were like jelly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I fumbled with the locks, my fingers numb with terror. I burst out into the pouring rain, not bothering to close the door behind me. I ran blindly down the long driveway, slipping and stumbling, not looking back, not caring where I was going, only that it was away from that. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. I never babysat again, and sometimes, in the dead of night, when the house is quiet, I still see those unblinking blue eyes, and I hear the faint click, click, click of tiny footsteps, and that chilling, reedy giggle. The rain had started just as Mrs. Davies pulled away, leaving me stranded in the sudden, oppressive quiet of their sprawling old house. I'd babysat for the Davies twins, 8-year-old Emma and Noah, a dozen times, but tonight felt different. The usual comforting hum of the city was muffled by the downpour, and the house, usually so warm and inviting, seemed to shrink around me, its shadows deepening with every flash of lightning. A chill, sharper than the evening air, snaked its way up my spine. My gaze kept drifting to the front door, specifically to the deadbolt, which I distinctly remembered clicking into place. Or did I? A knot of unease began to twist in my stomach, a premonition that this storm, and this night, held more than just bad weather. I tried to shake off the feeling. Of course, I'd locked the door. It was the first thing I always did. I was just being paranoid because of the storm. I went into the living room where Emma and Noah were building a magnificent fort out of blankets and pillows. Their innocent chatter was a welcome distraction from my growing unease. "Okay, for builders, almost time to wind down," I announced, trying to sound cheerful. "Just 5 more minutes, please, Sarah," Emma pleaded, her eyes wide. "All right, 5 more minutes, then it's story time," I conceded, settling onto the couch. After their fort adventure concluded, they brushed their teeth and got into their pajamas. I read them a silly story about a grumpy wizard, their giggles echoing faintly in the large house. Soon, their breathing evened out and they were fast asleep. "Good night, little monsters," I whispered, pulling their blankets up. I went downstairs, the silence of the house once again pressing in on me. The rain continued to lash against the windows, and the wind howled like a mournful spirit. I made myself a cup of hot chocolate and settled onto the couch, pulling a blanket around me. I tried to focus on my phone, but my mind kept drifting back to the front door. Had I really locked it? The thought gnawed at me. I distinctly remembered reaching for the deadbolt, feeling the click. But the doubt persisted, a tiny, insidious worm burrowing into my mind. I stood up, my heart beginning to pound. "Just check it, Sarah," I told myself. "Then you can relax." I walked slowly towards the hallway, the floorboards creaking under my feet. The shadows seemed to stretch and dance in the dim light. As I approached the front door, I could feel a faint draft. My breath hitched. The deadbolt was indeed in the locked position. But the door itself, it was ajar, just a crack, a sliver of blackness visible between the door and the frame. My blood ran cold. I hadn't left it like that. I knew I hadn't. I stared at the crack, my mind racing. Had someone tried to get in? Had they left it open? Or had it been open the whole time? A gust of wind rattled the door, pushing it open another inch. The darkness beyond seemed to deepen, to beckon. I slowly, cautiously, reached out my trembling hand towards the doorknob. I had to close it. I had to lock it properly. As my fingers brushed the cold metal, a new sound reached my ears. A faint, wet drip, drip, drip. It was coming from outside the door, just beyond the threshold. It sounded like water, but too slow, too heavy, too deliberate for rain. My hand froze on the doorknob. The dripping continued, rhythmic and unnerving. Then, a faint, sickly sweet smell wafted into the house. It was cloying, metallic, like stagnant water and something else, something rotten and sickly. The air around the open crack in the door grew impossibly cold, a pocket of freezing dread. My breath plumed in front of me, even in the warmth of the house. A shadow fell across the sliver of light coming from the porch light outside. It was tall, impossibly thin, and seemed to sway slightly, as if struggling to maintain its balance. It was standing just outside the door, obscured by the storm and the darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. My throat was constricted by terror. The dripping stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying. Felt like whatever was out there had paused, too. Paused and was listening. Listening to me. Then, a faint, raspy whisper slithered through the crack in the door. So close it felt like it was inside my mind. "You left it open." The words were drawn out, each syllable a struggle, as if the speaker was in immense pain, or hadn't spoken in a very long time. The voice was ancient, chilling, and filled with a profound, terrifying hunger. My body finally reacted. I slammed the door shut with all my might, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the house. I fumbled frantically with the deadbolt, twisting it until it clicked into place with a satisfying thud. Then I threw the chain lock, and the bottom bolt, and anything else I could find to secure it. I backed away from the door, my eyes wide and fixed on it, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. I could still feel the cold seeping through the wood, and the faint, sickly sweet smell lingered in the air. I stayed awake all night, huddled on the couch, listening to every creak, every groan of the old house. The rain continued to fall, but now it sounded like 1,000 tiny fingers tapping on the roof, trying to get in. When Mrs. Davies finally pulled into the driveway the next morning, I practically lunged for the door. I didn't tell her what happened. She wouldn't believe me. She'd just say I was spooked by the storm. But I never babysat for the Davies again. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still feel that cold draft, and I hear that faint, raspy whisper, reminding me of the night I left the door unlocked. The old house loomed against the bruised twilight sky, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the woods. This was the Miller place, known more for its reclusive owners and overgrown yard than for the easy money Mrs. Miller had promised over the phone. My friend, Chloe, had warned me about taking a job this far out, especially with the Millers. "They're weird, Sarah," she'd said. "And their house. It just feels wrong." But the pay was good, and I was 17, practically an adult, so I dismissed her warnings as typical small-town gossip. Now, as the last sliver of sunlight vanished behind the dense tree line, plunging the yard into an unholy darkness, I felt a prickle of unease. The house was silent, too silent, and my gaze kept drifting to the single, grimy window of the basement, where a faint, flickering light seemed to pulse, even though Mrs. Miller had explicitly told me the basement was off-limits. I tried to ignore the flickering light. It was probably just a faulty bulb, or maybe a reflection from something outside. The Miller kids, 10-year-old twins named Ben and Mia, were surprisingly quiet and well-behaved. They were already in bed when I arrived, their parents having left a note saying they were already asleep, don't disturb them, which was odd, but I wasn't going to complain about easy money. I settled into the living room, trying to get comfortable. The house was old, with a musty, damp smell that clung to everything. The air was heavy, still and strangely cold, despite the late summer evening. My eyes kept drifting to the basement window. The light continued to flicker, a faint, sickly yellow glow. It wasn't regular. It would brighten, then dim, then brighten again, like a dying fire. I told myself it was nothing, just an old house. Old houses had weird lights. Then I heard it. A faint, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It was coming from the basement. It sounded like something heavy being moved, or perhaps something struggling. My heart began to pound. I slowly lowered my phone, straining my ears. The sound stopped. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Just the oppressive silence of the house. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, or maybe just the house settling. But the thumping started again. This time it was louder, more distinct. It sounded like it was directly beneath the living room. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow, deliberate, and it was accompanied by a faint, wet squelching sound, like something soft and viscous dragging itself along a damp floor. Squish, squish, squish. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a faulty bulb. This wasn't an old house settling. I stood up, backing away from the living room floor, my eyes wide and fixed on the door that led to the basement. It was a heavy, wooden door, painted a dark, peeling green, and it was closed. But I could feel the vibrations through the floorboards. The thumping and squelching continued, growing louder, closer to the basement door. The flickering light from the window seemed to intensify, casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the living room walls. Then, a faint, low moan emanated from behind the basement door. It was guttural, pained, and far too deep to be human. It was a sound of immense suffering or perhaps immense effort. My breath hitched in my throat. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. My throat was tight, constricted by pure terror. The thumping and squelching stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying. Felt like whatever was down there had paused, too. Paused and was listening. Listening to me. Then, a new sound. A faint, metallic clink. Sounded like a chain. And then another. And another. Slow, deliberate. As if something was being dragged, or was dragging itself towards the basement door. The flickering light from the window intensified, becoming a frantic, strobe-like pulse. The air in the living room grew impossibly cold, a pocket of freezing dread that seeped into my bones. Suddenly, a faint scratching sound came from the other side of the basement door. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was soft, but persistent, like fingernails dragging against wood. And then, a low, wet chuckle echoed from behind the door. It was deep, raspy, and filled with a chilling amusement. It wasn't human. It was too ancient, too distorted, like something that hadn't laughed in a very long time. My blood ran cold. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that whatever was in that basement was not supposed to be there, and it was trying to get out. I finally found my voice, a raw, primal scream that tore through the silence. I didn't wait. I scrambled backwards, away from the basement door, and bolted for the front door. My legs were like jelly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I fumbled frantically with the locks, my fingers numb with terror. I burst out into the dark night, not bothering to close the door behind me. I ran blindly across the overgrown lawn, slipping and stumbling, not looking back, not caring where I was going, only that it was away from that. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. I never babysat again, and sometimes in the dead of night, when the house is quiet, I still see that faint, flickering light in the basement window, and I hear the low thump, thump, thump and that chilling, wet chuckle.